I'm Francis Levy. Ed Rasiej and I are co-directors of the Philoctetes Center, and welcome to the Allure of the Hive, Social Networking and Social Change, a greatly awaited panel here at Philoctetes. And as I was standing here, I was thinking about the movie Network from 1976. Does anyone in the audience remember that? Because I mentioned it to Adam. He didn't even recall it. And you know, Sidney Lumet and Patty Chayefsky. And what I was thinking is how different the word, what a different meaning the word network has from what it was in 1976. Before we begin today's panel, I wanted to again call your attention to our art exhibit. And I say again because a lot of people walk into our room and they don't realize that the exhibits are tied to the roundtables that we do. And this one is called Hive/Web/Mind, Animal Nests and Human Networks. And it was curated by Hallie Cohn and Adam Ludwig, and I think the equation between the organic and the cybernetic is rather dramatic here. Just to give you an idea of what upcoming events here at Philoctetes, on May 4th, we have The Art of the Sonnet, and Paul Muldoon, the poetry editor of The New Yorker, will be here. That panel will be moderated by Heather Dubrow, and Phyllis Levin and Susan Wolfson are also on that panel. We have forthcoming panels. We have two panels on extremism, the politics of ecstasy and the politics of social cohesion and identity. And the politics of social cohesion and identity is on the 22nd of May, and ecstasy is on the 3rd of June. We also have a panel on vegetarianism on the 5th, and on the 12th of June, we are doing a panel called Parallel Universes, the History of an Idea. In terms of our film program, we are showing a rather amazing film called Crossing the Line. It's about James Dresnock, the American who defected to North Korea. That's on Saturday, the 8th of May, next week. And there'll be a discussion following that particular film screening. Philoctetes, as you know, depends on you for support. We are the recipient, proud recipient of grants from the New York State Council on the Arts, Poetry and Music, Department of Cultural Affairs, Bloomberg, Templeton Foundation, and others. But the grants that we receive from these public foundations and from the city and from the state and the federal government are only program related. So we are looking for people to help us support our endeavor. And now, without further ado, I'm pleased to present someone who has a very long and I'm proud to say I feel profound relationship in my life. He's David Kirkpatrick, and he's the author of the definitive book on Facebook, The Facebook Effect, the inside story of the company that is connecting the world. And that's going to be published, is it June 12th? 15th. June 15th by Simon & Schuster. I've read the book, and I have to tell you that this is something you want to read. It's not only about the internet, it's a philosophical disquisition on the nature of the way we live now, kind of. So and I say that quite seriously. He was for many years the senior editor for Internet and Technology at Fortune magazine, which he joined in 1983. He specialized in the computer and technology industries, as well as the impact of the internet on business and society. Kirkpatrick created Fortune's Brainstorm brand, beginning with a 2001 conference in Aspen that ran for 5 years. With a group of former Fortune colleagues, he is currently organizing a conference and media company called Techonomy, focusing on the centrality of technology innovation for all spheres of human activity. David's going to moderate this afternoon's panel and introduce our other distinguished guests. So take it away, David.
Thank you, Frank. I'm very excited about this panel and very pleased at the group we've assembled here. So, you know, Facebook, we're not only going to talk about Facebook, but when you talk about the state of social media and social change, it's really hard not to focus primarily on Facebook just because it has so completely come to dominate social media at an astonishing pace. That it's really done that it's only 6 years old now, a little over 6 years old. It's gaining users at the moment globally at about 25 million or 30 million a month. It's probably just about at 500 million active users right now. That's roughly double what it was a year ago. And you know, there's all kinds of things about Facebook that I find quite striking. The point of today's discussion, though, is to try to understand how the kind of overwhelming growth and penetration of this phenomenon is affecting life more broadly. The way we live, the way society is organized, the way that we behave and feel and think. And so I guess the key question, as I was saying to some of the panelists beforehand, is, does Facebook make life better? It's not, are we using it more or anything like that. It's like, what is its impact? And there's a lot of ways to discuss that. We'll certainly touch on politics. We have one real specific expert on that here. I wrote a lot about that in my book, too. But so, Facebook, an interesting piece of data that was recently achieved was that Nielsen calculated in January that the average user of Facebook in the United States, of which right now there are about 120 million, the average one of those 120 million spends 7 hours a month on Facebook. Now, there has never been an internet site on which people spent 7 hours a month, period, ever. And the fact that they're doing that is, in my opinion, because it's about their human relationships. And one of the things that you learn if you look at Facebook, you don't even have to look at it for very long or study its history for very long to discover that Facebook was designed from the beginning in order to be a system that augments relationships that you have in the real world. Unlike the systems that preceded it, notably MySpace, Friendster, and others, with one or two exceptions, Facebook uniquely was designed for connecting with people you already knew. Rather than meeting new people, not dating, some of these things it's ended up being used for, we all know. But the design point has been to help you relate to people you already knew, to improve your relationships with the people you already knew. So that actually raises a lot of questions, considering it's been so successful based on that design point. Has it done that? Has it improved them? That's sort of what I want to discuss. And I have to say, as somebody who spent 2 years researching and writing about Facebook to do this book, it's stunning how little data there is on this point. I think some of the people here have done some of the small amount of research that has been done. Something that grows this big, this fast, is hard to even just get a bead on. So really, it's just now that real sociology is beginning to devote itself to Facebook, although Facebook has an in-house team of sociologists, partly because of its own conviction that this is so important. And I will just read you just mention one thing that I think we will have to discuss as we go forward. But the in-house sociologist, this guy named Cameron Marlowe, led a research study recently in which they tried to study the relationship between Facebook use and well-being. And they took data, they took a survey based, and you helped create the survey methodology. Nicole has, we'll get to who Nicole is in a minute, but among other things, she helped define the questionnaire that is standard for determining whether people are happy or not, kind of stuff, right? Is that correct?
We've developed some items for looking at measuring social capital.
Okay, social capital. Well, that's one of the things they use. So they used a whole bunch of fairly standard research tools to get people to say how they felt about other people, whether they were generally depressed or not depressed, et cetera. And they got 1,200 people to volunteer for that around the world, English speakers. And then they took those 1,200 people about whom they had all this data, and they did a database search for all of their activity on Facebook over a 2-month period. Because Facebook saves everything that happens, and if, some people have the ability to look at it. And so they studied those 1,200 people and how they'd use Facebook every day for 2 months, and they came to a conclusion that they felt was scientific, that there was a clear correlation between the degree of interaction that Facebook users have with their friends online and their stated degree of well-being. So that's just an interesting, very recent, that was only published 2 weeks ago. And in their research, I have the paper, it's a fairly short paper, they acknowledge this is just the first cut at this, we're going to have to do a heck of a lot more research. One of the interesting things about Facebook, though, is it is an unprecedented data set about human relationships. And there's never been a data set like it, and it can be used for a lot of interesting things, and it will be. So anyway, I'm not going to introduce this for hours here, but I thought I'd just end by reading a tiny bit from my book, just one paragraph or two, which is, I actually don't, I'm not a huge dweller on the negative side of Facebook in this book, I have to admit, only because I'm a believer in the significance of Facebook, and interestingly, very little research has been done in what negative things it might be causing. I have a lot of anecdotes of things that, people who lose marriages, or, the head of the British Secret Service, whose wife had all these photographs of the family on Facebook that were public when he was announced as the new head of that Secret Service, and the Telegraph ran them in a 2-page spread. So bad things do happen, but anyway, that's...
The bullying incidents with the young girls.
There's plenty of bullying incidents. Well, that tends to... That's Facebook, too. A lot of that's happened, yeah. MySpace, too. So I'll just read you this paragraph. The social changes that will be brought about by the Facebook effect will not all be positive. What does it mean that we are increasingly living our lives in public? Are we turning into a nation and a world of exhibitionists? Many see Facebook as merely a celebration of the minutiae of our lives. Such people view it as a platform for narcissism rather than a tool for communication. Others ask how it might affect an individual's ability to grow and change if their actions and even their thoughts are constantly scrutinized by their friends. Could it lead to greater conformity? Are young people who spend their days on Facebook losing their ability to recognize and experience change and excitement in the real world? Are we relying too heavily on our friends for information? Does Facebook merely contribute to information overload? Could we thus become less informed?
Right.
Those are just some questions. I frankly think the answer to most of those things is no, but at least I think they're worth discussing. Then I have, my next paragraph is, what does it mean to be a friend on Facebook? I think we should probably talk about that today, because Facebook calls relationships friends, and I think some of us would agree that it's not really the right word, but there may not be a better word. So anyway, that's some thoughts to sort of get things started here. Now let me just briefly introduce the panelists who are really eminent, every one of these panelists. I'll start over here. Andrew Rasiej is an entrepreneur and an internet expert in a lot of ways, but for purposes of being here, he is one of the world's leading experts on the impact of the internet on politics. And he runs something called the Personal Democracy Forum, which is an annual conference and website about the intersection between politics and technology. He also was very involved in Howard Dean's Technology Advisory Council and founder of Tech President, a group blog that covered how the 2008 presidential candidates used the web and how content generated by voters affected the campaign. Served as an advisor to members of Congress. You have this in front of you, so you don't need all this. But he really, in my opinion, is just about the smartest person I know about how politics and the internet are kind of interacting with one another. Next to him is Sean Parker. I'm really excited to have Sean here. Sean is one of the creators of Facebook. His official title is founding president of Facebook. He joined Facebook in July of 2004 when it was 5 months old, right after Mark Zuckerberg and his colleagues had moved to Palo Alto. And in the book, I tell the story about how they ran into each other on the street. But the reason that they knew each other was that Sean had identified social networking as likely to be the next big industry and figured out in March of 2004 that it would probably start with cohorts of similar types of people. And I don't even have this in the book, but he's told me that for a while he thought it would be the military where social media first... Okay, whatever. He heard about Facebook really early because he was living near Stanford. And he basically went out, came to New York just to meet Mark and the other co-founder, Eduardo Savarine, in order to try to get involved with these people really early on. He was really one of the very first people who ever came to them and said, what you have is a really big deal. And then by coincidence and fate and purpose, he ended up working there, and it was all very good for all concerned. He's also was one of the co-founders of Napster. He co-founded Plaxo, and there's plenty of other things to say about him. He's currently a venture capitalist with the Founders Fund. The company he's most involved with right now and spending a lot of time on is Spotify, which most of you probably haven't heard of because it doesn't operate in the United States, but it's thought by many to be the next gigantic music service. potential threat to Apple, and a very interesting company that has a social side. It may prove pertinent to discuss here. So that's Sean.
Causes, too.
Oh, well, Causes, right. He also is the co-founder of Causes on Facebook, which is the largest application on Facebook that is not a game. And Causes is a service that's intended to help you initially make donations to nonprofit organizations, but for which Sean and his co-founder have some much bigger visions that do get into politics and probably get there if we have time. So he's a very busy guy, I can tell you. Nicole Ellison, who's a professor in the Department of Telecommunication, Information Studies, and Media at Michigan State University. She's published a lot about social networks. She with Dana Boyd, who is also very well known in this field, the two of them wrote what became the standard definition of social networks in 2007, and I refer to it and mention them by name in my book, because it really helped crystallize the study of all this stuff by defining what a social network was. So what else should I say about you, Nicole? Co-edited one of the first, what?
What's the title for the book that you say that was that?
That was
It's an article,
yeah.
Actually, in the Journal of Computer Mediated Communication.
And she's also co-authored an article, The Benefits of Facebook Friends, using a social capital framework to explore social capital outcomes of Facebook use by undergraduate students. And I guess it is worth saying all this for the people who are watching online or watch it later, so I shouldn't say everyone just has this in front of them. Anyway, Nicole is really an expert in this stuff, though, and she has flown in from Michigan, where she teaches at Michigan State. So finally, Dhiraj Murthy has flown in this morning from Maine, where he teaches at Bowdoin. And he's a professor of sociology there and teaches a course on social media called In the Facebook Age, which is one of the few classes of its type that's come into existence so far. He's teaching it for the second year, where students talk about sociological themes surrounding social, political, and economic implications of social networking. And he's published on the use of social networking sites by subcultures and on digital research methods, which it has a lot of impact on, and wrote an article called Digital Ethnography, an Examination of the Use of New Technologies for Social Research. And he's currently working on a book about Twitter, or focusing on Twitter, called Social Communication in the Twitter Age. So we're very happy to have him as well. So I think the way to start is to just ask each person to give a little bit of the kind of big picture point of view on this question of how Facebook and social media are changing the way we live. And I would love to start with you, Nicole, if you don't mind, since you've been thinking about this for a long time, and I know it's an open-ended way to begin, but is it enough to get you started?
Sure. So our research has used a social capital framework for exploring outcomes of Facebook use. And social capital is basically a way of expressing the social benefits that we get from our relationships with people. And we have found that there is a strong relationship between the two. And I think one of the points that you make is that Facebook is used to kind of articulate our real life friendships. And I think that's important to keep in mind, because a lot of times the way that the popular press presents Facebook use kind of assumes that Facebook is happening in this kind of online world that has nothing whatsoever to do with our real life and face-to-face interactions. And I think even that term, real life, kind of presumes that what's happening online is distinct and unrelated. And I really think that that's a fallacy, because what our research suggests is that people are using these sites to connect with people that they know and love. I think that one of the other points you brought up was this kind of question of whether we're somehow our social life is being cheapened by the fact that we are exchanging these kind of mundane details of what we had for breakfast, for instance. I mean, that's kind of the classic Twitter example. Yeah. And I think a lot of times when we kind of in the popular narratives talk about the sharing of details, one of the things that I think we haven't quite figured out yet is how to calibrate the way that we present ourselves to different audiences, so that we're telling people things that they're interested in, and we're receiving things that they're interested in. And I think that one of the problems kind of that we're seeing now is that our social norms haven't really evolved such that we have a sense of how to calibrate our disclosures to different people, and that also the tools themselves are not as friendly. And obviously with Facebook you can create lists, so that's kind of the first step, right? That you would be able to say, here's some information that my academic colleagues might be interested in. Here's some information that my relatives might be interested in. Here's some information that my good friends would be interested in. So, so again, I think that part of what we're seeing in terms of some of the kind of negative statements about the role of social network sites in our lives is related to the fact that our social norms and tools haven't really evolved, and so it seems strange and anxiety-producing. But I will say that having studied kind of the introduction of other communication technologies, anytime a new technology is introduced, there's always a fear that it's going to somehow cheapen our real-life relationships or cause us to kind of lose certain skills. And so I think this kind of privileging of face-to-face communication is kind of, when you take a historical perspective, is not surprising. And I think, 10 years from now, we'll look back, and just like you would never talk about, is talking on the phone different from real life? I mean, it doesn't make sense to us. And I think eventually we'll evolve to the point where these tools are not so new and kind of anxiety-producing.
Just because they won't be seen as something completely different, yeah.
Exactly.
They'll just be integrated, yeah.
And so I think that it's kind of important to realize that we are at a juncture where this is new, and many of us are still trying to figure out, right, how to make this work. How do I gain benefits from these tools and avoid the risks? So I think as we become more skilled at that, our ability to accrue benefits and avoid risks, as our skill sets evolve, we will, we'll see different kinds of questions being asked.
Yeah, that's very well said. So Dhiraj, feel free to pick up on anything Nicole said, but first of all, maybe talk about why you decided to teach this course that you do teach on sort of, what's it called again?
In the Facebook age.
In the Facebook age, yeah. What led to that, and what has come out of it, just to start out, maybe?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think a lot of it comes from a lot of the points Nicole's been talking about. If we think back to when everyone started using video cameras or digital cameras or any new technology, there's a period where people think, wow, this is so different. And there is anxiety. We think back to the telephone. Even when the telegraph came out, people were very anxious about what's this going to do to face-to-face communication. So part of the class came about from a classic sociological question, broader question across the humanities, in a sense, of one, what's the relationship between individual and society, but also this binarism between the real world and virtual world. That's a critical part of what the course looks at and what my students are looking at. And a sociologist by the name of Manuel Castells has a concept which he calls real virtuality. And what real virtuality looks at is sort of, broadly speaking and simplified, these distinctions between the virtual and the real. And one of the things I talk to with my students find really fascinating is the virtual not real? And that continuously is something that enthralls them. So when you're on Facebook, are you not doing real things? Or if you get dumped on Facebook, is that not real? Well, you're dumped, right, at the end of the day. So what my students' conclusions are. So part of that is a movement in terms of our shift in thinking of looking at things that happen on social networking sites as real and then analyzing those implications. So a lot of reasons why I wanted to teach this class was to look at privacy and surveillance, politics, which I know David is very interested in and starts this book out, things such as Facebook causes. Facebook has all these aspects, really, from a sociological vantage point, society, politics, economy, all imbricated within them. So a reflection on the Facebook age, in a sense, for my students is a reflection on all these things. Another thing that I found really interesting from Facebook, and David, you mentioned this sort of exponential growth, and my work on Twitter, I see this as well, is a concept which is called social acceleration, which a lot of theorists look at. So this idea that our lives are really sped up a lot more now. If we think, you hear people say, well, back in my day, it was, this speed. And every generation does this in sociology. It's a generational change or a cohort change, right, in terms of things. But are things really that much faster now than they were before? And if Facebook is doing this, what are the implications of it? So really what Nicole is saying, is it cheapening our face-to-face relations? So if we Skype with someone, for example, does that change things? Or if we're a member of a Facebook group, and I've asked my students to look at this, is that a real community? Are you really doing things? If you say, okay, I'm going to join a Facebook group of knitters, does that make you part of a knitting community versus going to, for example, in Brunswick, where Bowdoin College is, there's a knitting cafe. And if you go there and start knitting with people, is that qualitatively different than if you're in front of your computer knitting along with people, whether that's synchronous or asynchronous? And so those are some of the larger questions that my students have found really interesting, and I'm really trying to draw from those perspectives. So,
can I ask one question in relation to what you both have said? Is that there seems to be people like I have Facebook relationships with a number of people who I never will see in real life, and in a couple of cases where when I have seen them, brilliant people, it's been an absolute dud. I mean, they prefer me. They prefer the Facebook relationship.
We like you more online.
Yeah.
Let's go back to being Facebook friends.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, part of this is textual in the sense that you're writing, right, in Facebook, and that's different to, let's say, a telephone call or a face-to-face conversation. Part of it is, and Nicole's work has talked about this quite a bit, and there's other people who have really worked on this, it's the fact of all of us in this room, and obviously there's a different relationship with the web world out there that we're speaking with as well, but you can see my gestures, my responses, my articulations, and this is a question I pose to my students, so not taking any stake of my own, but saying to my students, well, what is it going into Second Life, for example, so a virtual world called Second Life, or going into Facebook and chatting with people, do you feel different? And one of the things Nicole's work has looked at is talking about how people largely use Facebook to keep in touch with people who they've already met offline in some way, and it maybe is used to enhance or keep those relationships alive in a sense. But we do meet people on Facebook who we've never met, and we become friends. And one of the things my students are always asking is, does that mean we're actually friends with them? And it causes a redefinition of friends.
Defining what friends actually means, because you mentioned that in your opening remark, right? So, how many times are you in a social setting, a business setting, and someone drops a name, and you say, well, I'm a friend with that person, but you're not really. You
mean a Facebook friend with it?
No.
A friend.
Just a friend. I mean, just in, the term friend is really loosely used, right?
Right.
I mean, close friend, colleague, someone an acquaintance. Friend sort of gets thrown in there all the time, and it's never perfect.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is that a lot of times when you think about people who are concerned about the fact that students may have, or a lot of our work looks at undergraduate students. So, concerned about the fact that people have 500 friends on Facebook. Oh, how can you have 500 friends? That must, mean something. That must mean that this is somehow cheapening our sense of friendship.
Well, you're really busy.
How many do you have?
I have about 400, I guess. But I think
really.
right. But I think the point is that for people who use these sites, they understand that friends on Facebook are not friends in the kind of our colloquial understanding of the term. And actually, one of the things that we've done in our surveys is we've asked people, how many friends do you have? And then how many friends do you have on Facebook? How many of these friends are actual friends? And it turns out to be about a third. That they consider about a third of all of their connections on Facebook represent what they would call actual friends.
Yeah, but everybody's opinion of what is a friend is different too, right? So,
correct.
There's no way actually of ever standardizing it because each human.
The hope would be, in theory, and maybe Sean might want to touch on this in a minute, but that Facebook's controls and software would evolve over time to be able to more granularly and accurately reflect in the relationships we have in the digital realm whatever we think about the individual in the real world, so that you should be able to, in theory, be able to mimic that for your digital relationship. And that, I think, is the intention, but it's just really a time-consuming, difficult thing to achieve. And even as you mentioned, you could put people in lists. Most people on Facebook don't even know how to do that because it has never been made easy enough by Facebook, and it's something that needs to improve, as even Sean, I'm sure, would admit. But I want to go give you a little time to talk about the political side, or however you want, a big picture stuff, before we get to Sean. But I wanted to also mention, Dhiraj, a point that you mentioned that I hope we'll get back to, this issue of generations. It's often said at the moment that that sort of time frame in which a generation lives has become radically shortened. And in fact, my daughter is almost 18, and people are, now there's a bunch of kids under 10 using Facebook for Farmville. This is a very big deal. And there's an increasing number of people who are using Facebook much more aggressively even than my daughter did when she started using it at 13. So it's being said that, there's sort of these 2 or 3 year cohorts that are starting to emerge where their digital experience, this is for cell phones and a lot of other things as well, fundamentally different. And there's almost like a generation gap between kids in their early 20s and early teens that starts to emerge. And that kind of speed of technological change never occurred before. And maybe it doesn't matter, or maybe it does, but it's just something to throw out there for possible discussion later. But Andrew, so I want to hear you talk about more than friends, because you really are
I appreciate that.
Big picture guy. So.
Well, that's very kind of you. We were talking about speed. So, people share their opinions with each other about all kinds of things. Movies, restaurants, places to go, cities to visit, neighborhoods, whatever. And in politics, for decades, the way people would share information about their political leaders is they would meet over a dining room table, around a water cooler, over the back fence at a VFW hall, and they would share their prejudices, their fears, their aspirations, their hopes, their dreams, and eventually consensus is formed, and people go to the polls. And that happened in 2008 in the presidential campaign, the same way it's happened in every other election for decades, if not centuries, in this country's democracy. But I didn't realize how much things had changed until about 8 months before the election, when my 83-year-old dad calls me up and asks me to come over to help him with his email, because he doesn't know how to do more than one email at a time. He wants to do a group email. And I'm looking over his shoulder at the Mac that I'd given him a couple months before to play with, and I look at the subject line of the email, and it's "Watch this," and he's sending around Barack Obama YouTube videos to his friends. Now, my dad doesn't use Facebook, but to just emphasize the acceleration of this, my dad would have never picked up the phone and called his friends to vote for Barack Obama, nor would he have shown up at a rally to held up a sign, nor would he have put a lawn sign on his lawn. But if he was sitting around a dining room table and the subject of politics came up, he would have certainly offered his opinion. So here he was in one afternoon, reaching the same 50 people that it would have taken him a year and a half to reach the old-fashioned way. And so he became a 21st century political pamphleteer and didn't even know it.
Yeah.
If you think about all the people who then know how to use these tools, not just YouTube, but the social graph, the technologies that allow mass distribution, and in effect the encouragement to think a certain way, to affect people's opinion, there's such a massive exponential speed acceleration of the way public opinion is formed that our society and our political system has yet to come to grips with it fully. A couple of quick observations and examples. So some of you may be aware of the British elections are happening right now. And a lot of people are wondering what's the web's impact on the political elections. And they had a debate on television a couple weeks ago, and they had another one on Thursday, first time televised debates. And very much the same way that we've learned in this country about our televised debates is after the candidates are finished, the spin doctors get interviewed by the television pundits, and they are trying to affect those water cooler conversations that are going to happen the next day. But because of these social tools that are keeping people connected in real time, people are spinning themselves during the debate.
Right.
So the spin is actually set before the debate is even finished. So when the television cameras went to the pundits afterwards, they were having to play defense, which was to react to the spin that existed already among the population.
You know, it's worth mentioning that in the UK, Facebook's penetration is about 5 or 6 points higher than in the United States. It's in the mid-40s, percentage of total population on Facebook, whereas in the US, it's in the mid to low 30s of the total population. So they're even more Facebooked over there than they are here. So go on.
So there are other dynamics too, right? There's the fact that the British elections only last for 3 weeks. The U.S. elections last for 2 years, especially for president. The U.S. elections are mostly focused on raising money, which is a whole another piece of the puzzle. But two quick observations related to social media and politics that might be relevant to this conversation. One is, actually wasn't related to Facebook, it was actually related to Barack Obama's own website, mybarackobama.com, his own social network that he built during the presidential campaign. And it was a community of people who were supporting him, trying to raise money, doing house parties, volunteering, et cetera. And at some point during the campaign, Barack Obama voted for the FISA legislation, which gave immunity to the telcos for sharing privacy information with the government. And there was such an outcry among his supporters that 20,000 supporters of Barack Obama self-organized on mybarackobama.com and protested his vote and said, we're not going to raise any more money, we're not going to help you anymore because of this vote. And it got so big that Barack Obama actually had to go on the blog himself and respond to these people, acknowledge their, and this is, I think, a very important piece, validate their concerns. And as a result, and then he asked his policy people to stay online and engage these people in conversation. He convinced them that they had a lot more to fight for, that they were in agreement about a lot more than this particular bill. And he calmed the whole insurgency down. But there was something that was learned from that, which was this validation of your opponents. Now that was, and we were hopeful that as president, he would incorporate a lot of these tools. The reality of it is, and unfortunate is that when he became president, he almost kind of, well, first of all, I think we should just quickly know for political purposes, we kind of go backwards 8 years or 4 years whenever we change parties and there's a big transition, because we only have about 10 or 12, 11 weeks to do the transition, and the government is taking power. It goes back to all the people who were running, had their hands on a steering wheel of government 8 years before. So in effect, Obama got a Clinton kind of administration when he took over, you know, a pre-internet administration when he took over as president. And so as a result, there's a lot of the communications there and a lot of the way in which they think is very top-down, hierarchical, and doesn't really understand the dynamics of social media as it's playing out, and to the points that we're making today. So they've put on the armor of the White House. Yes, Obama does his radio address on YouTube, and yes, he sometimes takes questions, and yes, the White House is using Facebook and Twitter and trying to use the social media to help distribute the message. But the most interesting thing that I've observed is that since Obama became president, he stopped using the word we. He uses the word I. And we're trying actually now at Tech Presidents to try to measure actually the number of times he uses the word I versus the way. And the reason why I think that's insignificant is that I believe, and I'll end here, which is I believe that we actually is representative of the language of the internet itself. And that one of the reasons why Barack Obama was successful, there are a lot of reasons why he was successful. Certainly solid policies. George Bush was the president before Barack Obama. There's a lot of reasons. Hillary Clinton didn't get it. Certainly didn't get this. But sure. But I think it was that he actually authentically resonated the language of the internet in the words that he used to promote his campaign.
Well, that's interesting. So, Sean, I guess the question I wanted to ask you to start out is, how much in the creation of Facebook was it deliberately intended that it should affect the lives of its users? Not just as a service they used, but in the kind of way we're talking about here.
Well, gosh, and there's so much to respond to.
And feel free to go.
I mean, I think you made a very interesting point earlier, which is mirrored in a lot of the things that was said here around identity, and the fact that Facebook is a reflection of real identity. There was a lot of talk in the popular press prior to. In fact, this chatter still continues around our predecessors like MySpace and Friendster, that these online interactions were somehow virtual, that it was dating, that it was like, you know, people hooking up, and that was kind of the story of the first generation of the web. That was the sort of Web 1.0 story. Online community in that Web 1.0 universe was, you know, we sometimes it causes, we talk about like the Star Wars fanatic who went under the handle like Boba Fett 225 and hung out with other Star Wars fanatics in this sort of online community of people who they would not otherwise have met. But you know, you fast forward to like 2002, 2003, and all the big problems on the internet big consumer problems appear to have been solved. So you've solved like the big retail problem, Amazon and eBay. You've solved the media distribution problem somewhat with things like YouTube. You know, Napster and digital distribution of music still hasn't quite been figured out, but Apple's made great progress in that direction. But the identity problem remains unsolved. There is no online there is no sort of online instantiation of your real identity.
In 03 or say.
Right, and so there's I don't want to get into a huge conversation about online identity management because it has a lot more to do with than just who you are socially. It has to do with like who you are as far as the government is concerned, your ability to authenticate yourself, single sign-in across hundreds of thousands of websites. But this whole basic problem kind of remained unsolved. And so there was quite a bit of intent early on to build a system that was a reflection of your real identity. And so and some of that was engineered. So I think this gets at your question. So, you know, we required you to use your real name, essentially. Because we started with college, we had an email address that we could authenticate. And you typically only got one email address per student at college. There are some colleges where that was fudged, and you can obviously figure out ways around it. But that enforced this sort of one person per identity token. And then we went out of our way to enforce in the early deployment the idea that everyone had to have a picture. You couldn't get on Facebook without a picture. We would de-emphasize you in the search results. I believe we even had schools where we required you to have a picture, and we tracked this very closely.
I didn't even know.
We tracked this very, very closely. We looked at.
You didn't tell me that when I interviewed you.
Well,
damn it. Okay.
You picked up the message about identity really well, though, which is like the core important message. So it was. We were tracking very closely, you know, what percentage of people had pictures, and it was seen as a very bad thing when people didn't have pictures. So, you know, I think this was definitely the intention. We as you said, the tools are not currently there, and this is my biggest criticism of the Facebook product today. And when I spend time working with the Facebook product team, this is the thing I'm always pushing: is that, you know. The tools for segmenting or compartmentalizing your life and broadcasting information to one group versus another and subscribing to information from one group versus another are not advanced enough yet. You know, Facebook makes an algorithmic distinction behind the scenes about who you're better friends with. And that's something that a lot of people may not know, that when you look at your feed, it's biased towards people who you're actually interacting with more. So this is kind of an algorithmic proxy for these mental categories that you place your friends in real life. We need to get much better at building tools so that you can explicitly organize your friends into these different categories. You can publish information and subscribe to information from those groups. Lists is the first attempt at that, but it's not seamlessly integrated into the interface. So there's what we would call in product design a discovery problem.
Well, interestingly, lists were better integrated for a few months, and then they de-emphasized them in the most recent interface design. So it's much harder to do than it was.
Because they've gone back towards the algorithmic. And so, and this happens because it's a mass product, and we're trying to serve the needs of the mass population. And it turns out it's much easier to use an algorithm that looks at the way people interact to make a judgment about what information you should see than it is to turn those tools over to everyone and get this very lopsided experience where some people have a good, you know, have a good clean information filter and some people are just getting noise because they're.
That seems like a very key point. I don't think all of us understand the difference between the algorithm and the list.
Well, just briefly describe what you mean by algorithm in case people don't know what that
Well, when you log into Facebook, there's something called the news feed, which is your homepage experience. That was one of the big innovations that distinguished us from all prior networks. and the news feed is determined algorithmically. So you may have 500 friends, but you probably don't care about all 500 of those people. You care about a subset of them. And Facebook is looking at your interactions with people. You know, who's writing on your wall? Whose wall are you writing on? You know, what information do you click on versus not click on? In order to make a determination about how that feed should be presented. Now, you can always go and look at the sort of real-time list of all of the information that's flowing into your feed. You know, but for many people, that would be unmanageable.
You know, the basic point is software figuring out what you see, or are you figuring it out yourself? You know,
and it should be both, ultimately. And then, you know, kind of going back to your point about when you were introducing me, you were talking about, you know, we looked at the military. There was, in the early days of Facebook, MySpace had caught on, had, I think, over 100 million users at that point. Friendster had fallen by the wayside. They'd peaked at about 60 million users. The only markets, so I wanted to make a play in social networking, and the only markets that were open were these peculiar markets where the density of social connections was much, much higher, where you spent most of your time hanging out with the same type of people in a very dense and kind of environment where, so the two markets that were not on Facebook, and I only bring up the military as an example of kind of another market, but basically college kids and the military. And they have these similar characteristics where, like, military people they leave home, they're hanging out only with other military people, they're on a military base or they're abroad. College, they leave home, they're sort of, you know, on a campus, hanging out only with other college kids. And these were like the two groups of people that we identified that were not using Facebook. And obviously, military would be a terrible place to start.
Not using social networks at the time.
Right, sorry, that's what I mean. Not using Friendster or MySpace.
Right.
So, you know, and you could ask yourself, you know, you could have a long sociological debate about why this is the case, and I could give you my theories, but the reality was it was just these two groups that weren't doing it. And college was the one that made a ton of sense, and military was the one that made absolutely no sense. So I emphasized college and started talking to these various kids who had built college social networks.
Yeah, because there were other social networks at colleges that Sean identified and went and talked to also. But they just, you don't hear about them anymore because they all disappeared.
Right. And you know, college is this unique time in your life where some studies indicate you have more friends, that you are more social than at any other time in your life. So it sort of in some ways was perfect, and you kind of ask yourself the question, well, why is it that college kids were not using social networks when they're so densely interconnected and so social? Well, it just turned out they weren't using MySpace, they weren't using Friendster, and there are probably socioeconomic reasons why that was the case. But college ended up being the perfect place to start, and then had this added bonus of helping us establish real identity. And that was at least kind of directionally the one thing that I pushed the hardest in the beginning of the company. If there was one philosophical point, it was that this needs to be about mapping, creating a fairly accurate map of your real world interactions. It's not a perfect map, obviously. It's very fuzzy and and your real life interactions are much messier, and you have acquaintances and real friends and best friends, and you know, and people who are transactional in your life, and people who are much more what you'd call a friend, you know, coworkers versus you know, old flames and old high school friends and all sorts. So it's this very messy set of interactions, and we don't do a good job at Facebook mirroring all of that messiness and complexity. But I think that's the fundamental challenge for the product going forward.
Yeah.
I have a question, because so you were talking about the kind of design decisions that helped reinforce this offline identity, and I just was curious about your thoughts about the friends list, because to me that also seems to serve a very important role in that it constrains what I say about myself. If I know 300 people are going to call me out, right, if I lie, and that's why online dating profiles, right, would be very different. Totally,
yeah.
Okay.
This is very, very important, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, online dating profiles, and even MySpace to some extent. MySpace was or is a social network, but you know, people tended to. You should have seen the thing I said in a recent talk about MySpace. It was all over Twitter, and it was somewhat embarrassing. So So yeah, MySpace, kids tended to kind of put their best foot forward. That would be the way of diplomatically or euphemistically putting it. They often had this kind of online alter ego, and it was kind of, the distinction that I've kind of made between the Facebook user and the MySpace user is that users of MySpace tended to work to live. So work and their profession and their occupation was kind of secondary to. It was just, what they had to do to make ends meet in order to be like a photographer or like have a cool hairdo or like, dress and look a certain way and identify with a certain cultural group. And I'm broadly overgeneralizing here. But Facebook users tended to work to live, like they were professional.
Live to work.
Worked.
I thought you just said
I'm sorry. Live. No, you're right. You're right. Live. They tended to live to work. So they tended to be professional. They tended to identify much more with their job and their career and their education and so forth. So MySpace tended to be a little bit more of this virtual kind of early internet, and so it didn't matter as much what you broadcasted. Whereas you're right, on Facebook there's this social scrutiny. It's your real friends who you're going to bump into face to face, like you're going to see them in class, you're going to see them at work, so there's a sense of accountability.
I just look at that. That's the word I was just about to bring into this discussion.
Great.
So let me just do that because I think accountability is a really interesting word, and maybe I brought it. I spent a lot of time talking to Sean when I reported the book. There's no doubt about that, and I appreciate the time he's given me on that. But if you look at what a lot of people say about Facebook in particular and social media generally is that, small towns are where people historically lived in the history of mankind. Villages, small towns, etc. And in all those kinds of environments, people knew each other's stuff. We were in each other's backyards. We saw our friend. We knew who was having affairs with who. It was just in the village, right? And this is still true for a substantial percentage of humanity.
That's why we live here.
Yes, exactly. That's a point. Well, as has often been said, about 150 years ago, that began to diminish as people began to move to cities. And we know that the city is the fastest growing phenomenon in human culture right now. So more and more people are moving to cities. And I think we're right at near the cusp where half of humanity is going to be in a city in the next few years. So, but what often is said about Facebook is that it recreates some of that ambiance of the small town by creating much more transparency and visibility. And with that comes a necessary accountability, because if your friends all know what you're doing, you have to think a little more carefully about what you're doing. And one of the classic examples they love to talk about at Facebook about this, and get ready, Dhiraj, because I'm going to ask you to talk about this. But they always say at Facebook, or even 2 or 3 years ago, they were telling me this, well, in high schools, people cheat on their boyfriends and girlfriends less now. This was one of their constantly echoed examples, in their opinion, of why Facebook was having an intrinsically positive effect on the world. Because it used to be, you could say, oh yeah, you're my girlfriend, but then but if the other girl knows that on Facebook you say in a relationship with, you can't really do that. You can't tell her, oh yeah, you're my girlfriend. No, you've got to say it's one or the other, right?
Why is that positive?
I'm not saying it's, yes, okay.
His true colors come out.
I'm not saying, let's leave out the value judgment, but I'm saying accountability is built in, right? You have to, so this is the world we seem to be moving toward a little bit, and you touched on this a little bit, Nicole, too. So I guess I wanted to just ask all of you to discuss a little bit of this idea of whether you think it makes sense to say that we're moving back towards a more small town kind of world, and what you think about that. And Dhiraj, this is sort of related to some of the stuff you've done in your class, I think, too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting hearing you speak about those internal conversations of Facebook, because while you were saying that, I thought, well, what about Facebook causing more infidelity, right? The idea of people getting into contact with lost flames, oh, this X, that X.
We call that retrosexuality.
Maybe, yeah.
Retrosexuals.
I'll remember that term. So the idea of just saying that one is in a relationship, et cetera, personally don't buy that, nor do my students in terms of interactions, because there's ways of using that relationship status anyway in a playful way. People who are 18 say they're married or divorced or separated or in a complicated relationship. Anyway, using the relation or married to their pet. So part of it is just being a teenager, right, and being a bit rebellious and using that relationship status and constantly changing it every week in that way. So I guess one of the questions I have back is maybe it's not causing accountability, but rather is allowing us to be less accountable in ways or open up new ways of infidelity, et cetera.
There's, I think, a difference between accountability and authenticity.
Yeah, which is, there's definitely a distinction to be made, but referring to accountability, not authentication, which is
Well, authentication to me sounds like authentication, like this is the real person.
Yes.
Authenticity means that the person's being as honest as he can be in a human way.
Yeah. Yes, but part of it then goes, but accountability on the other hand, going back to David and his dialogue with Sean, I think, which was quite interesting. If you're talking about your daily experience, this is going to your question of are we moving more towards a village mentality? Part of my response would be no, in a sense. Yes, in one sense of, okay, maybe in a village or a small town, you'll see that person having pancakes at the diner or the fact that they're drinking a coffee. And those things are posted on Facebook, and we know. Does that make us more accountable, though? I think that's an important question. I don't necessarily, or do we even care? On the flip side, right, if someone had a Pop-Tart for breakfast, what does that actually illuminate us about in terms of our friend networks? And does that make us more accountable to our friends? And secondly, do we actually think about it when we put these updates? And people on their iPhones, looking around New York, coming in today, you know, people are constantly updating their Facebook. You can see the Facebook app on their iPhones. Are they really thinking when they put update, I'm at 6th Ave, I really want a hot dog? Are they deliberating and contemplating that before they post it to their 2,000 friends or not?
But
So I think there is a key thing in sociological point of view, like German sociologists like George Simmel dealt with the question.
Simmel would have a lot to say about that.
Yes, I mean, it's simply the question of knowing and being known. I mean, de facto,
Absolutely.
rather than being an anonymous.
Yes, but that would lead to your leading question, David, in your introduction, in terms of, is this about narcissism then, in terms of our communication? Are we becoming more of an I culture? And is Facebook reflective?
Well, I would define it a little more positively. And narcissism is the negative way to spin it, but I think it's about this basic human need to feel connected, right, and to feel loved and cared for and remembered, so much of the optimization that happens is just about making sure that the things that you say and the content, the information that you contribute into Facebook gets seen by the right people so that they can give you some form of feedback, whether it's just clicking like, whether it's writing a comment, whether it's sending you a message or writing on your wall in response to it. It's closing that feedback loop so that, you know, when you upload 200 photos, some percentage of those actually get a comment, and you know, over the course of the next couple days, you'll check back in with Facebook, and constantly you'll get this little low-level sense of gratification, this sense of being remembered and cared for, which no matter where you are, and maybe you're not densely wired into a group of friends physically where you are, you're still able to continue getting that sense of connection with people.
So my question back to you is that meaningful? Right? Does that ultimately have an impact? So one of the things I ask my students, and this goes back to our large question of friends, right? So if you have 2,000 friends, 500 or 150, and we can go to Dunbar's number for any of you who are familiar with that, of we can't really maintain friendships over 150, but that's contestable, and I'll go into that. But with your cohort of Facebook friends, one of the questions I ask my students is, how many of you would be willing to, at a moment's notice from a Facebook friend, loan them $200, right? Or give them a kidney. Or I have a list of 10 questions, right? And we stratify the list, then the kidney one's the big stratifier at the end. It's usually their parents, their best friends, et cetera, that go to that. So I guess throwing that back to you, how much of this low-level thing is meaningful at the end of the day?
I mean, I think it is meaningful at a low level in a background sense, but so much of what drives our human interactions are these sort of low-level background sorts of things. So I'm not going to sit here and argue that it makes you more likely to donate a kidney to one of those people.
And I'm not saying it should or shouldn't.
If I could, I want to just add another angle of attack here, because I think we should make a difference between connectedness of the social graph and communication, because I think they're very different.
Fair point, yeah.
I'm not a sociologist or an anthropologist, but I think most people would agree that human interaction, communication in the physical world is 90% nonverbal. How people sit, folded arms, open to each other, whatever. There's a lot of communication. There are many relationship factors that are reflective on Facebook that exist in real life, as we were just discussing, right? But I'm not quite sure the communication level is as profound as it is in the physical world. And when we discuss and we talk about Facebook, we're talking about these sort of parallels of behavior and how things change. Maybe there should be a second book, the Facebook affect, as opposed to the Facebook effect.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're already getting him started.
Okay.
I wanted to make one point, because I'm not sure that it makes sense the way that I think to ask, would you do this for any Facebook friend? In the same way that it doesn't necessarily, and maybe I misunderstood, but that I would never ask, of all the people you know and that you've ever met face to face, would you give them a kidney? Well, of course not. There's tie strength. There's different kinds of relationships. For close friends and family, yes. For my, hairdresser's third cousin, no. So I guess I think what the site does do is lowers the barriers for those kinds of requests and social support. Right, so some of the work that we're doing now is we're trying to kind of figure out what is the mechanism by which people benefit from Facebook, and so we've shown this relationship with social capital, and so one of the things we're looking at now is social support and the extent to which people will, when they're having a bad day, when they're sick, will post that and get these responses. And at least with the interviews that we've done, when we ask, do you feel this is authentic? They say yes. I mean, and the point is that it is the people who in their offline relationships would also probably reach out. Right, but essentially what the site and other social network sites as well do is that they make it easier to broadcast these requests for social support or requests for information or advice. And so the fact that when you're looking for a job, to be able to post something like that to Facebook and to kind of broadcast this message and kind of crowdsource it to your 500 or 2,000 friends. I mean, to me, that seems to be really at least in my way of thinking, the kind of interesting dynamic that's changing is that it is kind of lowering the barriers for these kinds of requests and also, giving support and giving information to other people, that kind of reciprocity.
There's an addictive, that may account for slightly part of the addictive.
Yeah, well, I want to get to addiction in a minute, actually.
Can I respond as well very, very quickly? So Nicole, just to clarify, I wasn't trying to equate those two, so with your hairdresser analogy, et cetera, but rather to show the distinction between, let's say, friendship pre-Facebook and friendship in a Facebook age. Because part of it is the definition, let's say, of friendship in that, and maybe the illusion of friendship pre-Facebook with friendship in a Facebook age, right? And I think that a distinction has to be made of how we interpret the definition of friends itself, because it is the term that Facebook chose, and I'm not privy to some of the internal debates of why friend was chosen.
It was historical. There was a historical analog to Friendster and MySpace. Okay. So this was kind of the standard term of trade. And there's a bunch of different concepts that happen when you become friends with someone. You publicly state that you know the person. Friend is a convenient term for that. You also implicitly subscribe to everything they're producing, and then they subscribe because it's a bidirectional link to everything you're producing. You basically permission them to see what you're producing. So those three things get kind of blended together.
I just wonder whether Facebook would be as successful if they chose the word amigo instead of.
well, it's Spanish-speaking countries.
I just wanted to hypothesize something because Dhiraj's challenges are actually very interesting in this.
I hope so.
I don't. No, that's your whole job, I guess. But when you look at Facebook and how quickly it's arisen, one of the things that any of us who kind of followed this professionally have to ask ourselves is, if this came along so quickly, you know, what could replace it? I mean, something could potentially probably come along even faster to be the next thing, because historically, that's what history tells us, right? And so I spent a lot of time asking myself, what might it be? What might it be? And honestly, I've never really figured it out. But you just kind of gave me a thought between listening to you and Sean and Dhiraj talk. You know, this issue of Facebook being primarily textual by its basis, right? It's a textually based system from the outset. And as well, I guess you were saying.
Well, it's image oriented too,
but,
as Sean.
But Andrew was saying this thing about the nonverbal cues that we give as part of communication, and you know, Facebook has not evolved very well, even in the 6 years, to achieve more of the emulation of that nonverbal.
I have 2 words for you, David: chat roulette.
Chat roulette.
Took the words right out of my mouth. Right.
Well, chat roulette actually, it seems to me, to be on a decline already, though, because it's, I mean.
We'll talk about this.
I mean, chat roulette is an interesting proof point of something different, definitely.
I think there's some people who don't know what chat roulette is. So chat roulette, in the 10-second description of it, it's a website that basically on the screen it's divided into 2. And each screen is you and someone else out there. And each of you has a webcam.
Live video.
Live video, live audio, live chatting. It can be anyone logged in from
random.
From obscene to anything, right? So you could be hitting anyone with a webcam anywhere in the world. And it's a new, the labeling of it is hard in terms of definitions, whether it's social networking or not, but a new connecting.
It's not social networking by
It was also interestingly created by a Russian.
Yes, a Russian teenager.
17-year-old Russian named Andrei.
17-year-old Russian created it,
And his thought process behind it was so interesting. He said, well, all of these internet companies have tried to structure data. And he just read a book on chaos theory, and he thought to himself, well, how do I introduce randomness into the equation? How do I create, I should just create a site that's entirely based on the random.
Yeah.
And so the idea is you click next, and you're transported around the world and connected to some completely random stranger. There's this very funny video that describes the chat roulette phenomenon, and you know, the way the guy explains it is, you know, 10 seconds later, some 14-year-old Swedish girl is judging you.
It's just the Mashable video, right? Yeah.
Well, let's talk quickly about this question of addiction, just to have some order here, because a lot of people talk about addiction in relation to the internet, but specifically in relation to Facebook, because of the sheer amount of time that is being spent. And there was there have been several studies that I have here, various versions of, but that postulate that people are in some way harming themselves by using this stuff too much. But one of the things I liked in a response to one of those studies that just came out last week, which was a study at University of Maryland that asked students, 200 students, to spend a day, 24 hours, not using any electronic tools, and then just studied what happened, and studied what they said about what happened. And it's not the most scientific approach, probably, but the students all freaked out, obviously. You know, that's a given. But then somebody who was involved in producing this study said, but we noticed that what they wrote at length about when they blogged about what happened was how they hated losing their personal connections. Going without media meant, in their world, going without their friends and family. So that's a weird thing to be addicted to, you know. It's weird to say that you're addicted to communicating more with your friends and family, you know. So I don't know, I just want to throw that out. What do you think about that idea?
I think you're absolutely right in pointing out that the term is very value-laden. We would never worry about someone being addicted to reading, right? Addicted to books, addicted to face-to-face communication. I mean, really, I think the terminology, again, kind of speaks to our anxiety about this fairly new phenomenon that we don't quite understand.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think the fact that they're using these tools to connect with friends and family, I actually see that as a very positive thing. That this is enabling them to kind of engage in this lightweight communication that they might not otherwise do, seeing as we now are so dispersed.
But it's so different, Nicole. I mean, it's different than writing a 2-page letter. It's killed the solitude. I mean, the intensity, the shortness of the interaction, the ubiquitousness of the interaction is so different. And there's very rarely the time when people used to be in the 19th century, especially, but even the 20th century. I grew up in the age of letter writing, epistolary age. People would sit in quiet and almost be absorbed in the sense of aloneness, and that aloneness would propel them into these acts in which they would engage other people.
engage with other people.
I just have to make an interesting observation, which my wife may object to my making. But we have a 17-year-old daughter. She's almost 18. She has a boyfriend. They spend all day, every day, texting. That's all they ever do, right? And they do other stuff. I think they probably do, iChat and all sorts of stuff. But they've started writing each other letters. They write physical letters and mail them, and they've been doing that. I think that's very interesting.
Yeah.
That these, I don't even know how to explain it. I haven't even asked her why she's doing it, but it's something sort of an interesting
That's
thing.
fascinating.
I mean, there may be some sense that something is lost in all this,
that's fascinating.
instantaneity.
Going back to we did a little bit of, kind of idle pontificating about what was happening as we were building Facebook. It wasn't really that explicit, but one of the things we spent time thinking about a little bit was the difference between a face-to-face interaction, a telephone conversation, an instant messaging conversation, an SMS text, a Facebook message, a wall post. So all of these different mediums carry, there's different things. There's synchronous versus asynchronous. So like when you're talking to someone in person, that's synchronous. When you're talking on the phone, the same thing. And SMS is somewhat less synchronous. It's a little bit more time delayed. And then instant messaging is synchronous. You're back and forth constantly with them, with the person. Facebook messaging is very asynchronous. Email, very asynchronous. But there was a different cost mentally associated with each of these different things. So sending an email has a higher mental cost than sending a Facebook message. Facebook message somehow felt a little lighter, and SMS felt, depending on who you're sending it to, a little bit lighter. If it's somebody you're really close with, it's a little bit lighter. If it's somebody you don't know, it's very heavy because it's intrusive and you're intruding into their cell phone. So so there was this different cost, and then a variety of other characteristics. And I think the letter writing thing is a great example of where this idea of the cost of a communication medium in terms of commitment and time spent and so forth comes back into play, because people inherently understand that when you lower the cost, it means less. So when you write someone a letter, you're basically saying, you're special to me. You're deliberately increasing the cost, artificially increasing the cost. You don't need to.
So now it's even more meaningful than it might have been in the 19th century.
Or
in
a
that
Christmas
sense.
card.
Yeah.
A written Christmas card.
Right.
So I think in that way we can view Facebook as another communication medium, right? So rather than
in Facebook you have to break it into all of the different communication
and the
mediums
ones
that we've woven together to create the product.
No, I think it's a critical point actually.
Yeah.
That comes out.
No, I was just going to say, and I think you're spot on in terms of what you're really signaling. So it's not so much the content, but rather what it means, which is signaling this kind of attention. And there's been a lot of talk about kind of the difference between a birthday greeting on someone's wall in Facebook versus a call or a birthday card. And again, I think it's this trade-off between kind of cost and effort and what it signals. But I think that people are cognizant of that. I mean, that they understand that yes, that it is easier to send a birthday note through Facebook, but I don't think that means that it's not authentic, and I don't think that means that it doesn't mean something to the person that receives it.
And I think to add to that also, there's often a debate of whether Facebook is killing our culture, et cetera. This is written, for example, by Andrew Keen. And I think Sean describes this very well in saying it is another communication medium. And I think that's an important thing. And in fact, maybe it's benefiting letter writing, a contentious challenge maybe, or Christmas card writing to show its specialness or differenceness. And I think that is an important thing, which sometimes we can get into the dangerous thing of saying it is killing our culture. And I think that can be problematic because it is just a communication medium at the end of the day.
I don't have a watch. I don't know what time it is. Are we about time to get to Q&A? Yeah. So do we just have the one mic, or are we going to bring the other mic out? So the way we do it is we stand at the mics and we stand in line if there's multiple people. And if somebody's downstairs or on the web, we can get questions from them. But identify yourself before you make your...
Can I say something just briefly before you start? I have to turn this on. And I just wanted to mention that one of the artists who produced some of the work that's part of this exhibition, I think probably the artist who most reflects the themes in this discussion and the themes of the exhibition is here. And I just wanted to ask her if she'd like to get up and make a comment, talk a little bit about her work, because her work are these very intricate line drawings, and they're drawn from research about the development of the internet itself. So Suzanne, do you want to come up and say a couple things about your work, or not?
Yeah, just a quick comment would be good. Yeah.
Come on. You go to the mic, yeah, or this mic and that one.
Yeah,
It's fine. Come over here.
Hi, my name is Suzanne Kelser, and these are my drawings here, and the booklets here. And I just wanted to emphasize that where these came from were the technical mechanisms where the internet came from and how it developed in terms of interconnectivity and not having any barriers and openness, and I think it really seeped into the tools that we use today on the internet. So it was just really wonderful to be able to participate in this. And just in terms of following the subject, I have a question, and that is how do the speakers feel about how the nature of communication has changed in terms of these tools that we're using today, in terms of like people who are able to communicate like that one-line pithy saying. They seem to have like a one-upmanship on these tools. I just want to, how is that changing language today? Mm-hmm. So,
if I could add something to that, which is that I think there's another phenomenon happening, which is that we're creating a viderit society. A viderit society.
Video, you mean? Yeah.
So videracy is the ability to...
Did you make that up?
Yeah, that's my word.
I like your words. Good term.
It's videracy describes someone who not only understands complex video as it's presented to us, which we watch television movies, we all can understand video, but also can produce them. And the idea that text-based communication is going to continue to dominate when you think about how many flat-screen devices are being sold in the world and how the exponential amount of physical area for the display of video is exponentially growing, and the amount of the area for text is exponentially shrinking, even though you can show text on flat screens. And that there's another generation that's viderit and is thinking about communicating through images and as opposed to text. So far through YouTube or chat roulette, we've seen talking heads. But as an example of what I mean, just in terms of we still don't know where this is going, when movie cameras were invented, the first things they filmed were people performing on stages in plays. That wasn't exactly movie making. It wasn't until the camera was moved off the tripod by D.W. Griffith and Eisenstein and others that, in fact, an entire new art form was created. So, just to give you a sense of the context, if you had an Iraqi war veteran's mother asking a politician or the presidential candidate, when would this war end, and it's a talking head video, imagine how much more powerful that video would be as she was asking the question and panning over to her double amputee son, Iraqi war veteran, sitting at her kitchen table. Yeah. Right? There's not yet an understanding of what the media ecology will do to our society with all these tools, like to your point.
But to tie it to Facebook, I have a whole chapter in my book about the invention and creation of Facebook photos and how catalytic that was to the whole growth of the system. And I also happen to believe that one of the main reasons Facebook caught on and became this massive global phenomenon and nothing else did was just a peculiar good fortune of timing and the sudden ability of everyone to have a digital camera and digital photographs being easy to upload, and that exact kind of coincidence of the digital photography availability and Facebook's invention was a huge virtue for Facebook's growth. But then photos became the by far largest application that radically increased usage of Facebook when it emerged, and probably is the single biggest reason to explain why it went from a nice, successful college thing to a massive global thing. And even Sean's nodding his head over here. So then it raised the question, and now we're in a day...
50% of all page views on Facebook, last time I checked, were photo views.
I think now it's Farmville is maybe maybe changing that a little. But anyway... going to your chat roulette comment, though, Sean, now we're in an age where pretty much increasingly everyone's going to have a video camera on them at all times. I mean, I think we're getting close to that, right? We're not quite there yet. But at that point, we may need a new medium. It's all, putting these things together.
Yes, I like your idea. Am I coming through?
Yes. Who are you?
Anna Burton. I'm an analyst that graduated downstairs. Okay. You talked about accountability, but you're not thinking as the analyst would about unconscious accountability. When you put something into words, either verbally or written, you are already modifying what your initial feeling was. And that's a different language. How is it that I pride myself on knowing when a patient is lying to me, and so do many people in the police, because they pick up the signals, the body signals. And I think it's very important to recognize this theme came out in the kidney donation story. You know, that took it right to the body. The body is what counts in our communication more than we realize, really. So what is that going to do? I think every single contributor on Facebook has done an unconscious revision. You're not getting the raw person, you're getting a face. You're getting a face. And that means that the face will be more unified if that person is the kind of person that accommodates. An accommodating person will show a face that will suit whatever group he expects to meet. Right. And a person who is the opposite of accommodating will come through very dramatically. But most people are accommodating at least half the time. So what's going to happen? You're going to get subgroups on an unconscious level, so to speak. Instead of one person agonizing over a severe conflict and developing symptoms and going to an analyst, it will be people on one side and on the other side. You're going to have group against group rather than within the individual. That's what I would predict for the future.
Why are you saying that? I'm not sure why you said that last point. Why are they against each other?
It's just that when you are accommodating, you make yourself a likely member of a group that's easy to accommodate, whereas other individuals will accommodate to a different group. So you'll get group versus group more than individual versus individual, or individual versus himself.
Nicole had a thought.
I did. Well, just so I'm thinking of Irvin Goffman and
Yes.
the idea of that we have different audiences and that we self-present for different audiences.
Absolutely.
Correct. Which happens offline and online. And I'm just curious because it seems, and maybe I'm reading into this, but it seems like the assumption behind your question is that we don't do that kind of accommodation to the specific audience in face-to-face interactions?
No, we don't. That's how you know when people are being false.
Well, okay, so I've studied deception in online dating profiles, and so one of the things that we have kind of uncovered there is that even though the signals are different than in face-to-face communication, there are signals that we do use in reading online communication about whether someone is being authentic or not.
There's also the question of anxiety. If someone's saying something that intrinsically makes him anxious, you'll pick that up. And it feeds into your own reaction. But I don't want to go any further.
Yeah.
That's the only I think I'll stop
Yeah,
there.
I guess I would just question the assumption that we are completely accurate in face-to-face communication in terms of determining authenticity or deception, and have and are just kind of floundering around with no signals at all in this.
I know what I
offline
wanted
world.
to
Yeah.
say. All of psychotherapy is built. All that we do happens because we get people to put things into words. At most therapies, anyway. When you put something into words, you're using the mental functions that organize, reconcile, look to logic, and specify. Those are all the things that language does. So what you're getting, even though it's off-the-cuff language, it's still different from saying it.
Writing,
Or from thinking it.
Writing
It's
is
not like
different
people
than
aren't saying it on Facebook. You're saying
they're-
writing it is a fundamentally different thing than
And
verbalizing.
saying it is different from feeling it. There's two
How about
things.
if it was video status updates?
That works. I do video. I do some video work, and I know if you can see a good part of the body, you don't feel the difference. That's enough.
I mean, I have to say, to one of my general feelings after all this work I've done obsessing over Facebook is that there is a sense in which it is intrinsically an accommodationist medium in some weird way that I don't think it's easy to prove. But
all mediums are.
I will say that, you know, I feel a little weird admitting this in public, but I'm not much of a Facebook user myself.
yes, I know.
And
None of the founders of it are, actually.
right, well, in part, yeah, we do.
I don't want to be a member of a club that would have me as a member.
But in my case, it's that I have to play so many different roles in so many different contexts, and you know, perhaps I could, through a lot of lobbying and working with the product team and the product team's own sort of process, eventually Facebook will get to a point where it can accommodate someone with a life that's like as complicated. I don't want to claim that my life is more complicated than other people, but it's just, I have 2,500 friends on Facebook, and they fall into a lot of very different groups. And I would put forth a different face in meeting those different groups, and it's dramatic in my case. Dramatic enough that I don't feel like there is any kind of, very little I can say in that medium that feels genuine.
So all 2,500, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
and I'm a little bit more aware of that, I think.
It is literally true that I don't think there is one single one of the major founders of Facebook that's a heavy user.
Why?
I'm not really sure why. I know Matt Kohler, who's another one of the key early developers, told me that he feels that not being on Facebook or Twitter, he's also a big investor in Twitter, is a competitive differentiator for him.
It's this insider versus outsider thing as well. Yeah. Like if you remain an outsider, I think it gives you a different kind of perspective. That's part of it, and it's also that, you know, back to your addiction thing, you know, a dealer just shouldn't do their own crack. And that's the first.
So you do believe it's addicting? Okay. So let's hear another question or comment here.
Boy, there's a segue, huh? My name is Joe Plotkin, and I work in the internet. I don't know what else to say. One of the points that Andrew brought out before is that the internet is essentially the participatory medium. That's what's unprecedented, is participation. So I've sort of been noodling this, what I'm calling, just for alliterative purposes, Plotkin's paradox, which is, in this age where we can so instantaneously correct errors in media, correct, you know, factual errors, and shoot down anybody who makes any kind of gaffe anywhere at any time, 24 hours a day, it seems like the persistence of nonsense has a sticking power that is just, I just don't understand. I was wondering if anybody could shed some light on it. Examples include, you know, Obama not being an American, death panels, Swift Boat, Veterans for Truth. These sort of memes are easily shown to be false, and yet they seem to persist. And in this deluge of the hive mind, why?
That sounds like a question for you, yeah.
So 20% of Americans think that the sun revolves around the Earth. Yeah, exactly. Only 20%. I think.
What percentage of them watch Fox?
I think. Americans are of that 20%. I think it's important to remember that, and this is particularly important in relation to politics, I think, which is that, you know, one of the reasons why our democracy works is that it fundamentally believes that, you know, education is a pillar. But if we've been choking our education system for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, public education system, you know, we shouldn't really be surprised at what we have here. There's a huge challenge, I just touched on it earlier, about media literacy, right? What is veracity in a connected, you know, CNN put the Twitter feeds from the initial Iranian revolts right on television, which I found massively irresponsible because they had no sense of what the veracity of those was. And then, you know, later in the second round of protests, there was a lot more, as more eyeballs were looking at it, there were people picking stuff out and saying that's not really an authentic person, or looking at videos and seeing that the shadow in the video in one section was the sun was coming from this side, and the other, 10 seconds later, it's coming from the other side. So it's obviously not connected storyline, or that someone holding a gun and shooting it and someone laying on the street bleeding is not necessarily mean that that person shot that person.
They also had Lou Dobbs on every day, so.
Right. I'm just saying that there's just, I don't really have an answer for you except for the fact that unless we fundamentally re-engage our society on what education is in the 21st century, not just education, you know, as a term, but what it means in the 21st century, this kind of, you know, echo chamber amplification of, you know, what people want to believe. You could literally go to people who say that Barack Obama is not born in the United States and show them the birth certificate with the seal, and they're going to still say that it was forged. So they're, you know.
We are ranging widely, but I think that's sort of kind of the nature of talking about some of this stuff that's so socially interpenetrated. Identify yourself and.
Is this on?
Yeah.
I didn't know if I should leave it in there. Speaking of accountability.
And who are you?
Oh, I beg your pardon, Elaine Terrace. Speaking of accountability and authenticity, how do these things differ within different generations? Has anybody ever looked into that? Mm-hmm. What differences do we see in communications amongst, I mean, on Facebook, obviously, amongst different age groups, generational variances? It would seem to me these would be extraordinary because the differences are apparent in real life, not so they must be exponentially more different, more varied in virtual life.
I speak, I guess, a bit to that. I think this concept of media literacy is very critical here, and I guess my one concern I have is that we in society have different levels of media literacy, and generational is kind of one distinction, but socioeconomic class, level of education, urban, rural. I mean, there's kind of a whole host of social inadequacies or differences that we have offline that are then we see in terms of ability to use technology in ways that accomplish our goals, I guess, if you want to kind of think about media literacy in that way. And one of the things that I'm concerned about, and this is based on conversations with my students, where we were talking about instances in which people were using Facebook to find, basically vet people for jobs, to find people who hadn't paid their loans, right? And that there was this kind of host of negative outcomes. And when I said, well, what do you guys think about this? Their reaction was, oh, well, if they don't know Facebook, you know, if they're not smart enough to know to shut down their you know, to adjust their privacy settings, then it's their fault. And I guess I think this is what your question made me think of, is that I think that's something we need to be careful about, that there is these different levels of kind of internet literacy or social network site literacy, and that my work, I think, speaks to the fact that there are benefits. There are also risks, and I think we need to be careful that it's not that we're all kind of equally able to benefit from and absorb risks, and that it's not kind of certain segments of the population that are bearing more risks due to their online behavior. Any thoughts on that?
Privacy, I think, is completely different depending upon the generation, what it means. And there
Not
is
just generation, but also socioeconomic background.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. In fact, Dana Boyd did a seminal talk at Personal Democracy Forum last year about the white flight from MySpace, and how also, besides privacy, that the same prejudices that occur in our social world around people of color or people of social economic backgrounds is playing out online as well. So there's all these factors are all happening at the same time, and that's why it's so hard to. That's why your book is important, David, because you're trying to, at least take a slice and analyze it while it's moving. And these issues are so dramatic because for young people who may have an openness about privacy today, they don't have the ability to understand that what they're doing on their college Facebook page when they're in college will have an impact on their lives 10 years later.
Or even two.
I hope it has less and less of an impact. That would be in my way the sort of the positive consequences that everyone has a little hair on them, and that's a realization that I feel like the media doesn't. Especially in politics, the media doesn't acknowledge the realization that everyone has a little hair on them, and it's like if you live in a world where everybody has their stupid drunken photo or them in their dorm room with a bong or something like that, if that photo exists for everyone, then hopefully you can start to take some of that stuff off the table. Otherwise, we're gonna wind up with. Otherwise, sort of the eligible political candidate skews even more towards like the Mormon missionary, right? Like, the number of people who are eligible to do anything in a public sense will go down so much because so much of this information is now out there when previously you had to dig for it.
That's also a very commonly held view among the leadership of Facebook, by the way.
And my hope is that it it's like you look at Barack Obama and his mea culpa or his very very public statements about what he has and hasn't done in his past, and you hope that that's a model for the future, that everyone isn't judged a priority based on whatever they did in their past.
Also, to add to that, a very interesting point, Sean, I think it speaks to maybe a blurring of the public and private boundaries in the sense of not even generational, but just how we view the distinctions between public and private. One of the things I ask my class is, if someone has their dorm room door ajar, do you just walk in? But if someone has their Facebook profile open, do you feel comfortable walking in? And most students say, I feel comfortable walking in the Facebook profile, but I don't feel comfortable walking in the room. And part of that just speaks to, do we have different conceptions of public and private in terms of Facebook itself and our norms in terms of, but it's a very large debate.
Well, it also implies a
important.
different perception, a different opinion of the degree to which we are truly disclosing ourselves in one context as opposed to the other.
Yeah, because you see the person in your dorm room. You don't know if someone's been on your Facebook page unless they post something.
No, but also your Facebook page is presumably a somewhat more curated version of yourself than your bedroom.
Maybe
which is
not.
Really got to be your real room, right?
Depends how authentic it is from that point of view, because some people do really put a lot of their life on Facebook, which is why I would never say it's not an authentic reflection. It definitely is an authentic reflection of one of their selves, to use Nicole's Goffmanian perspective on that. It is a part of themselves, and there's a lot of stuff on there. So if Sean is, if part of what Sean is saying is that all of us will start putting on bone pictures or drunk pictures or et cetera, and that will then change, that then would have larger societal implications of what we view public and private as. What was formerly what some theorists have called our backstage self will now no longer be our backstage self.
This is very much demonstrably already happening. I mean, if you look at, when the hullabaloo when Bill Clinton was admitted that he had smoked one joint or something like that, and then Barack Obama put in his whatever but it was very controversial that he might have. Okay,
he might have.
Whereas in Obama's autobiography, he mentioned that he used cocaine. And it was like, well, he just said it, and nobody even batted an eyelash. So I mean, that's a few years later.
Except that, just a quick story. There's this young man by the name of Hassan Ali who was moved out of his storage locker the day after September 11th, went out of the country, came back in, and was immediately detained by the FBI or by the immigration people because they suspected him of being somehow involved in the terrorist, because apparently when he left, the owners of the storage facility had told the police that he left in a hurry and we think that he had some bad stuff in there. And so they started following him around. And they basically told him they interrogated him for 2 days. They said, we're going to follow you. So he decided that he was terrified that he was being followed. So he decided that he was going to just simply start sending every meal he took a picture of, every person he met with, every place he slept. He took thousands of pictures and videos and started sending it to the FBI. constantly, every day.
He was Facebooking.
And he turned it into an art project, and he put it all up on the web, and eventually they said, stop, okay.
That's good. That's really good. Okay, please.
My name's Deb Rogers. I think what all of this is the extension of technology into people's lives. More and more, and then if you're in the subway, you don't have to think or look because you've got something in your ears, and technology is replacing people and saying, well, if you use the machine, the computer, it'll be cheaper than if you use a person. So people are disappearing, and labor is disappearing. I think it trivializes what people can think, what people can say. It trivializes the fact that we're all living so far apart from each other. And people, we are dumbing down. We're watching American Idol. We're getting more obese. We are consumers who are manifestly more consuming. And I think this feeds into it. So that if something's happening, you feel like you're connected, but you're really not. You're just emptier than if you had to struggle with how you felt and maybe reached out for somebody.
Well, that is one opinion. And you're perfectly right to say it. Go ahead.
Hi, my name's Joshua Tennant, and I'm a technologist. And I wanted to hear more about how the social graph is being affecting political change. These two guys, I think, have had something to do with creating applications for that. Or
I want to hear Sean talk about that.
But I wanted to ask.
I want to hear both of you, but I definitely.
That's a big topic, and I want to make sure we get as many questions. So give me sort of a particular.
Well, yeah. Well, I wanted to ask more outside of purely like an election, for example, but more like as Paul Hawken would talk about a movement of movements, just kind of how the internet has uncovered different groups of people that want to be activists and creating change, but seeing like how can those people be harnessed, exposed, and
okay. So just quick two examples of where technology actually, I think, even though it has its limits to the woman's comments about making us less connected, it actually has some power. So during the presidential election, on election day, a project that we ran was called Twitter Vote Report, where we invited people to tweet from their election polling places any irregularities that they saw. And we put it up on a map, and 10,000 people tweeted, and in effect created a Jimmy Carter election monitoring service that kept track of possible problems. Now, as an example, if you remember in 2000 when the Bush-Gore election happened, there were a lot of accusations that there were buses filled with African Americans that were prevented from getting to the polls, or there were problems. There's voter access problems. You didn't hear that in 2004 and 2008 because, frankly, there's so many cameras and so many people, so many of us are connected and media connected that we've actually become Big Brother in a way. So that sort of leads me to just give you one other example. We think about e-government, which is government using technology to deliver the services that it's supposed to provide. But what we're about to achieve is something called we-government, where citizens are going to figure out, and are already building tools and application of sharing information with each other about the civic environment faster than government can do it. And if government doesn't innovate, and if Congress doesn't innovate, governance itself will change as we become more connected.
And you asked the question specifically about the social graph, and I'll answer that piece of it. So the causes application is all about trying to leverage this new visibility and access to what we call the social graph to enable social change and activism and fundraising and all of these things that have to do with civic life. So, but there's two parts to that. The first part is already been achieved somewhat, which is that the social graph is like the map of all of our kind of human interactions, all of our relationships. That's now been represented online. So we first have to demonstrate to you that's available, and second, we need to build tools so that you can better leverage it. So we kind of have this notion at Causes that everybody has this stored value locked within their set of social relationships, and this is something that's taught by community organizers, and it's sort of the sort of Saul Alinsky Rules for Radicals school for organizing, this idea of like, that everybody has power, social capital, that they don't really know they have. And if you can show them that they have it and give them tools or a methodology for unlocking it, then you can activate that stored potential and create all this sort of social change. So broadly speaking, with causes, we're trying to just build those tools. We're not prescriptive in terms of how they get used. We're kind of a neutral platform. But we want to show you you have that power and then give you tools to unlock that power.
We have time for two more questions, basically, if they're, and not speeches, questions. So everyone has to be short.
I'm going to bring this to a different area.
Identify yourself.
My name is Edie Selman, and I went to a Facebook meeting last week. Brilliant man, and another person was talking about Twitter. This was a very specialized audience. This was a special meeting for literary agents because the business of books is changing rapidly. We're talking about a social movement and culture and communities. But I sat there frozen when I found out, forget about new authors. I mean, if they don't have a platform and they're not on Facebook and they don't do this and sales and marketing, it's not just the kids talking to each other or just having this. This is going to absolutely change everything.
Sure.
And that's part of the social aspect. And it's not, it follows what Amazon did with the Kindle, breaking the prices of books, Steve Jobs topping him, the publishers pulling the books back, saying, you're not going to tell us what to do with the pricing. We're telling you everybody's going to pay the same thing, but we're going to set the price, and we're going on Facebook because our websites don't get enough hits or bites or whatever you call them, and we will get them. We will get them. And I'm sorry, Francis, that's the truth. We have to get it together, otherwise you will be behind it.
So what's the question, basically?
Well, the point is every author, I mean, Kafka couldn't get himself arrested today. I mean, if I just had speculative fiction.
But every generation has new ways that artists approach society. I mean, Madonna might be a singer-songwriter today, but if it wasn't for MTV Video, she would not be the icon that she is in the world.
Yeah, well,
like her or not.
I showed was Bowie on Facebook.
Talking, silent film stars, many of them couldn't make the transition. Radio couldn't make the television. There are examples after examples of this.
When I was taking my master's, it was an interactive telecommunications before anybody even knew what the hell it was. I was too early. And McLuhan came to speak. And the medium is you know what? He had a book. We had to buy his book. It was still in a book form. We're here talking about Facebook, but we're really in the room, real people.
Well, I think that's one of the problems right now. With the iPad coming out, everyone's saying, well, magazines are going to be on the iPad, and we're going to be sitting there reading these little, pieces of glass. But and then they talk about, authors are going to start putting in video and pictures. We don't know what they're going to do. The aesthetic is going to be designed by the people who inherit these mediums, not by us imagining what they're going to be.
Realistically, I
just have one little question, and that's for you, Sean. Did you come to New York because you were involved with Napster? Did you get the whole idea, hey, I can do this and we can do Facebook? Did it grow out of the music experience and the Napster thing?
Did I come? Well, I actually just recently moved to New York.
The music business got hysterical. I broke it down. But you took what you learned and brought it into a more social aspect where there were no copyright problems and licensing problems.
Well, there is a common thread in terms of decentralization. I think that was the common thread between all the things I've done. It's about connecting people across the world. Initially, it was about sharing media, and it's sort of interesting you asked that question because now my latest venture is this company called Spotify, which is kind of like the Napster of Europe. And there it's fully integrated with Facebook, where you click on a friend, you see their entire music collection. But music and the music that defines you and is part of your identity, that's just one expression of yourself. Like the photos you take day to day are an expression. The things that the status updates, your tweets, like your blog posts, the way you set up your profile, what you say your interests are. These are all different expressions of yourself. Facebook is just a platform for sharing all that information. In some ways, it's more the general case of Napster, which was the special case.
Let's end it with a magician, Mark Minton, who does wonderful
Okay. Can you make me an investor in Facebook?
I can try.
I could.
My question is actually asynchronous in that same way, because my wife is actually home watching this online, and so it kind of goes back to the privacy question. It's very specific. It's a very big news, is that John Mayer has switched recently from Twitter to Tumblr, and she wants to know, what does this mean? So it's a microblogging software.
She texted you that? Or
she texted me this question. So that's why it's coming in a bit late from the privacy conversation.
Anybody want to venture?
Well, I mean, the reality of it is he got burned really badly on Twitter.
For making that very nasty comment.
He made some really nasty comments. I mean, Tumblr's another tool. And it's got, for those people who want to do more than 140 characters and want to have more to say and be connected to their communities, Tumblr's a fantastic tool. We're going to see constant iterations of these tools. Every couple of weeks, there's going to be a new one.
Yeah.
Foursquare, we didn't even talk about Foursquare, which is location, which is adding a whole nother level to this.
I checked in there on that.
Yeah. Who's the mayor? Is there a mayor?
I became the mayor.
This whole issue, the whole issue of, as technology's evolving even more rapidly and the impact that it's having on our lives, I mean, the question of technologically mediated social interaction is inevitably going to be a subject that we talk about again and again here at Philoctetes and elsewhere. So, I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg, really. This is a very, very big topic. I hope we all continue to have more good discussions. I think this was a very good one, and I thank you all.